Hey, it's Seryna Myers, and if you don't already know me or know my work, I help recovering people pleasers and the helpers and healers and high achievers of the world to get really raw and real about what they're feeling and like bring all of that to the surface. And in particular, I specialize in some less than cozy emotions like anger and guilt and resentment and all of those things that we tend to tuck away, bury, and pretend aren't happening. But real wholehearted living happens when we acknowledge that, embrace it, and then see what these emotions have to teach us. Now, I also host a sweet little community here on Facebook called the Lightwalker's Path. And inside, I posted a question saying, hey, I'm doing a whole bunch of live videos in the month of February. I've just written this book about anger. Like, what is it that you would love to know about anger? And so I'm going to be bringing these questions forward and sharing my insights with you. Now, of course, this is just one person's opinion. Take what resonates for you and leave the rest. But this question came in the group, and I thought it was especially profound. So I wanted to make sure that I covered it. And I know that the person who asked it isn't the only one who's going to benefit from hearing this. So I thought I would share it with all of you as well. So here's the question. How do others work through their wounded child trauma and remind themselves while they're working through it to control their anger from building up inside them, resulting in explosive responses projected onto others? This is huge. A lot of the people who work with me are moms, and they feel like the meanest mom on the block because they've got all these things that are building up inside them. They don't have an outlet for it. And then it comes in these like really often insignificant moments where they snap or they lash out and they're really frustrated. And then the shame comes because they also feel super, super shitty about having let it get that far, or even for their kids to have been able to see that kind of expression of anger. It's really important that our kids see us get angry, not in damaging and hurtful ways, but in ways that normalize the experience. I'm not someone who thinks that we need to get rid of anger. I think we need to find healthy ways to express it. And I think it's a really big teacher. It shows us who we are. It shows us what we value, what's important to us. It can be fuel to make some positive change in the world. So I am very pro anger, but I'm not pro destruction and trauma and hurt and all that kind of stuff. But the more we have these conversations about the things that are like taboo or ugly or uncomfortable or whatever words and labels that we use, scary is another one that I've heard to use anger. The more we can like normalize these experiences, the more that we can as a collective start to create patterns and healthy habits. And I'm going to talk about the 5 things that I think we should do as well, to be able to form relationships with these emotions so that they aren't taboo, they aren't scary, they aren't overwhelming. We know what to do with them. Okay, so the first point that I have here is to not let small things become big things. Seems super obvious, but a lot of people who find themselves in these positions start off with this childhood hurt, right? So when we have these old hurts and these traumas, we start to create these belief systems about how the world works and how we fit in the world. And oftentimes it's even part of our identity. We think that, we're undeserving or we're unlovable or our voice doesn't matter. All these different things that as adults end up expressing themselves as like not being able to speak up in meetings because we think that nobody cares what our opinion is, even if we're really good at what we do. It might find us in relationships where we hide parts of ourselves away because we're afraid that if we bring our whole self to the table that we're going to be deemed unlovable. And certainly any kind of emotion that doesn't feel good or might make somebody else not feel good, we just like sweep it under the rug and pretend it's not happening. But unfortunately, when we do that, this denial eventually ends up building up and we do explode because we're human and we have a finite capacity of how much energy that we can hold, and emotions take up energy, particularly ones like anger. But here's what I've noticed is that when we start to get into these habits where as things come up, we deal with them, then there isn't an opportunity for that anger to grow and grow and grow and like build pressure with it within ourselves. Where, don't mind my cat, she's just chiming in. Yes, you're an expert in anger, Callie. Yes. No, please go away. Sorry. So when we're dealing with these things as they come up, they don't get an opportunity to accumulate. When they don't have an opportunity to accumulate, we don't have that pressure that builds in and makes them really hot and, yeah, buddy, sorry. It makes all this extra pressure become so much more explosive, right? We become like these powder kegs when we hold all this stuff in, and it doesn't have to be that way. So the more that we can get in the habit of having really good boundaries, of honoring ourselves, of making time for ourselves. Because one of the other things that I really see in a lot of the people that I work with is that they are ultimate givers and they give so much to their clients, to their families, to their friends, and there's not a whole lot left for them. So we need to make our own care a big priority. And when we have these habits of taking care of ourselves, of honoring our boundaries, and of speaking up and dealing with things as they come up, they don't get a chance to really build up. So then what we have is just the childhood hurt and trauma and the belief systems that came from that we have to deal with. We don't have that on top of the day-to-day stuff that we've been sweeping under the rug. Okay, the second really big thing is this has been a big part of my journey, is to prioritize inner child work. Now I'm going to give you a tiny little plug here. I put together a PDF a couple of weeks ago called Conversations with Anger. I'll link it in the comments once this video is done. In it, I give 3 different ways that you can sit down and have a conversation with your anger so you can figure out why it's even here so you can send it packing. And one of those ways is to sit down and dialogue with the inner child. The inner child is so deeply ingrained in our anger process. It's the part that holds on to these hurts. It's the one who formed these beliefs. It's the part of us that wasn't yet discerning. So when we were taking in this information from our society, from our media, from our cultures, from our parents and religion and everything else, there wasn't really that adult filter we have today where we can say, actually, that doesn't work for me, and I choose not to believe that. We are these sponges. And so whenever we live a life that didn't really align with these belief systems that we were presented as being like the right way to do things, we start to feel like there's something wrong with us. We start to shame ourselves and feel othered and like we're always on the outside. And then that creates other belief systems about our deservingness and our belonging and everything else. So when we can sit down and have conversations with the inner child, and not just have those conversations, although I do think it starts there, but I really recommend inner child play dates. Like that's actually been a big part of my process. When we start to have these activities, we start to engage with a part of us that has been pushed away and neglected, a part that like didn't get to be heard, and didn't get to be seen, and didn't get to be valued. And that is so healing for them and for us. And when I talk about the inner child, I always think about it as this external part of me, which I know is probably not maybe even the healthiest way because we really want to see ourselves as whole. But when I do that, particularly when I'm in hard places, it is sometimes easier to love something that's on the outside if I'm not feeling really great about the stuff going on in the inside. And so that's one of the reasons why I think about the inner child as an outside person or entity that we're working with. When we become adults, we have the responsibility to parent ourselves. It's no longer our parents' job, and any shortcomings that they had and anything that we didn't get from them, it is now our job to give those things to this aspect of ourselves. So when we can spend time with that aspect and connect with it and let them be heard, this is balm for our soul. It's so huge. I'm going to tell you a little story. When I first started doing inner child work, I was presented with myself usually at 5 years old, but 5 to like 8 is where she would show up. And one of the times she showed up, she said, you know, whenever you go swimming, like you don't even wet your hair now. And like you used to do mermaid handstands and now you go in the pool and you don't even wet your hair. And I was like, oh, okay. So you want me to like go swimming and wet my hair? And she was like, oh, no, I want you to do mermaid handstands, which is the most ridiculous thing. It's something that I made up when I was like, I don't know, probably about 8 years old. And now every time when I'm in a pool, I find a little like corner to myself and I will do these mermaid handstands. And I feel completely ridiculous, but I know that when I do it, my grown-up self is like, oh my God, people are looking and what are you doing? And my inner child is like, yes. Not just as her hair wet, she's doing this mermaid handstand. So I get to honor her in these ways. For other people, it might be baking cookies. It might be finger painting. It might be jumping in puddles. It might be watching particular movies or eating particular foods. The inner child is going to ask for different things. And when you connect with them at different stages of the game, they're going to ask for different things. And they're going to have different feelings that they want to express. But it is so important that we foster this relationship with this aspect of ourselves so that this big, deep, like old healing can take place. And I always know that it's tied to the inner child when my anger gets to the point of tears, and then the tears feel sorrowful. Like I feel sorrow, not just anger, not just frustration, not just sadness, but sorrow. And there's something about sorrow and the depth that it lives in my body that I'm like, oh, this is an old hurt. Okay. And then I know that I have to dig into that a little bit further. Okay, so step one was don't let small things become big things. Step two, prioritize inner child work. And again, I'll link to that PDF, Conversations with Anger, so you can get a copy of it. And I think the second part is the inner child part. So there's 3 different ways that you can connect with your anger, but start there. If inner child things are coming up for you, start with part 2. Okay, the third one is something that is probably going to sound super obvious, but in a lot of spiritual circles, there is like this belief that we need to do it ourselves, which is ridiculous. Or if we just have a positive mindset and we stay high vibe enough and we can like pray it away. When we're talking about deep old hurts, we cannot just decide those things are over. Trauma is here for a reason, and we need to be able to do the work to let that go. And oftentimes it means getting outside help. It might be one person, like maybe it's just a therapist. But it could also be like someone who does EFT. It could be an energy healer. It could be a hypnotist. All these different people who can help you to access these deeper levels of consciousness. It might be a whole team of them. I know like in my journey, I've done everything from energy healers and shamans to therapists to like even medicine. I've been on antidepressants for the last 6 months, and it's been a big game changer in my life. But for whatever reason, we've like demonized this, and we've made it that it was like this awkward, uncomfortable thing that like literally every single person that I told I was on medication to, they said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Why are you sorry? I'm freaking happy. And it's about time. I had like lifelong depression. So because we have these belief systems that these things are like for other people or they're not talked about, there is this shame and the stigma that shouldn't be there. And so when we can get some outside help, not only does it help us to offload some of the weight that we're carrying on our own, but it also widens our experience of the healing that takes place. If you are the only person who is working through your trauma with you, and like it'll be your own thoughts and feelings, it'll be the insights you have from your meditations, and like maybe like the events you attend or the books you read or the TED Talks you listen to or the podcasts, whatever you are exposed to is as far as you can get. However, when you're working with somebody on the outside, particularly somebody who's really experienced, they get to have this whole other range of perspective. It's so much wider. And now the healing that can take place, there's way more possible for you. So getting outside help is the third thing that I would suggest. The fourth thing, and this actually might come from working with somebody on the outside. It might be something that you even just recognize within yourself, but that's to recognize what your triggers are and your triggers and your patterns, and then make a plan for them. The problem that we have with anger is its unpredictability. It can sometimes spring up out of nowhere, particularly if we're dealing with like old trauma and hurt or even PTSD. That will be someone who really has like no real control over the trigger, that like the response that the trigger creates. But when we know what our triggers are, it makes it a lot easier to navigate life, either by avoiding things or by having strategies so that if this takes place, then this is what we're going to do. And you want to make sure that the people who are closest to you know what those strategies are. Again, you are not in this alone. It's okay to call in for reinforcements. It's okay to call in for help. I would actually recommend it. It's really, really important. And so when we have this plan that takes place, what ends up happening is the anxiety that comes from the anticipation of anger is gone, because it has no power anymore. The reason that we're anxious about what could happen is because we don't know what the plan is. But when we have when we have this awareness of, if this happens, I'm going to react this way, and this is what I'm going to do about it, then it just sort of streamlines the process, which sounds like business speak, which sounds a little bit weird, but it really does make it a lot easier for you to feel comfortable, because it takes away a lot of the unpredictability. So you might not know when you're going to have the reaction, but you know that when it happens, this is what you're going to do. And that can be such a game changer, particularly if you're someone who is afraid of your own anger. Okay. And the last one is one that's actually probably the hardest out of all of these. And that is to give yourself so much, like bold, underline, italic, exclamation point, so much self-compassion. Having the courage to sit with awful, uncomfortable emotions like anger is huge, and not a lot of people are willing to do it. having the willingness to recognize your trauma and the impact it has on you as an adult, is asking so much of your tender heart. And what ends up happening is we end up in this place where we criticize ourselves for our reactions, and we miss out on our progress. We miss out on our courage. We miss out on just how strong and resilient we are for being able to do this work in the first place. You are amazing. I'm going to say that again. You are amazing. The fact that you are here, the fact that you are holding on to this hurt and you continue to show up, the fact that you show up with an open heart, connect with other people, and how you keep giving of yourself when you're carrying this heavy load already. That is amazing. It's incredible. It's beautiful and it's powerful. And when you have someone like me who gets to do this for a living and hold this space, it is like awe-inspiring. Like I am never, ever, ever without like about my clients. It is really beautiful work, and I want you to give yourself some credit for it. I don't want you to rush into, yeah, but I still have all these things to do. Literally take the time to reflect on how far you've come. Take the time to celebrate. Every time you catch yourself before losing your shit, that is something to celebrate. Every time you uphold a boundary that was uncomfortable, especially if it was like a friend or a family member and you had to like stand in your boundary, celebrate that. All of this progress is adding up to something really beautiful and really transformational, and it's really exciting. And if you just blow past it, you're going to miss it. And you're always going to be in the state of feeling like you're lacking, when in reality, you have so much. You have done so much. And it's incredible to witness. So give yourself some compassion. Give yourself a break. I always say give yourself the space and the grace that you need, because holy wow. Seriously, this is not hyperbolic here. I know sometimes I got really like flowery with my words, but the things that I witness in the people that I work with, the people that are in my groups, the people who come to my events, I am often moved to tears by the way they show up for themselves. Because when we show up for ourselves, we are breaking these traditions of anger that we have held and that we have come from. We are breaking generational curses. We are ending the line. The buck stops with us. That means the generations to come are not carrying this burden anymore. When we are doing this work and we are uplifting ourselves and expanding our souls, we are then giving other permission to people to other people permission to do the same thing. We are giving them an example of what is possible when they might have thought that they were stuck with whatever hand they were dealt. It's really important work you're doing, and I don't want you to sell yourself short, because it is incredible. Okay, that's what I got for you, my loves. Let me know in the comments if you caught this on the replay and if this resonated for you. I would love to know. And have you tried these things? Do you do something else? If you're somebody who's holding on to a childhood trauma and trying not to lose their shit as an adult, like what are you doing? Because that was the question. What are other people doing? So let me know in the comments. Or if you're a member of the Lightwalkers Path, you can share it there too. And if you're not a member, then like, why aren't you? And also just one tiny little plug, my book, Sacred Anger, is coming out in just under a month. You can find it at sacredangerbook.com. All right, that is it, my lovelies. Have a really great rest of your night. Take care.